everybody. This is Sirish Raghuram. I'm co-founder and CEO at Platform 9. Last week, I was with many of you at KubeCon in Austin, Texas, and I have some survey data to share with you. We ran a survey at the show, and we had more than 200 people take the survey, tell us about how they're using Kubernetes and related technologies. So let's jump right into it. The first stat that I really want to share is the type of persona who's working in the Kubernetes community these days. In the survey, we found that more than 31% of the audience identified themselves as being responsible for application design and architecture, and nearly 25% identified as having exclusively responsibility for operations, and 30% on top of that said that they're responsible for both. So to put it in other words, more than half the show was application design and half the show was application operations, and there's a significant meld between the world of application design and operations. It speaks to how far we've come in the DevOps community and the role that Kubernetes plays in making it easy for application dev and design and operations to collaborate around a common platform. The next stat that we found was on use cases for containers and applications running in containers. Unsurprisingly, the most popular application use case was around running stateless web applications, with nearly a total of 80% of the audience identifying with that use case. The second most popular use case was actually using containers as a replacement for VMs, as a more efficient and portable alternative to VMs. And the third use case was the one that really surprised me, was the use of functions as a service, containers as a way for these organizations to be able to leverage serverless paradigm. Functions as a service was the third most popular use case, and that surprised me. Other more well-known use cases like running data and analytics applications were lagging the interest in functions as a service. I found that really interesting. You may know that Platform 9 is the company behind Fission, which is the leading open source fast framework that runs on Kubernetes. If you don't know about it, I encourage you to check it out at fission.io. At the show, we had a talk by the lead developer of Fission, Som Vasani from Platform 9, and we had a lot of conversations with the community at the Platform 9 booth and around the hallways, and it was really interesting. I found this anecdote very interesting, that interest in FAS at the booth, at the Platform 9 booth, we were there for 3 days, it doubled from day 1 to day 3. Is this a sampling issue? Was interest in functions as a service as a use case around Fission and as a use case around Kubernetes growing because of people learning about this at the show? Probably. This is probably not a coincidence. So it tells me that there's some real interest, and as people get exposed to this use case, they really take to it, and it really resonates with the audience. We asked a question on what type of infrastructure are these people using with their use of containers in Kubernetes. And the most popular platform individually was Amazon Web Services, but on-premises infrastructure across Linux and VMware was actually the interest in that, combined interest in that was greater than the use of Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services was a close second with about 54% of the interest. On-premises infrastructure had a total of about 57%. One interesting anecdote I found was that most of the interest in on-premises infrastructure was on Linux. There were a lot of people, though, who expressed interest in using VMware, but almost everybody who expressed interest in VMware also expressed interest in running Kubernetes on-premises on Linux, bare Linux. And only 6% out of a total of 21% who were interested in VMware wanted VMware exclusively. As you may know, my team and I come from VMware, and before we started Platform 9. So to me, it marks a large shift in how the VMware community itself is, as they use DevOps and cloud-native technologies, they are really adopting Linux as a platform that sits alongside VMware and not being exclusive beholden to VMware. Interest in other public clouds like Azure and Google Cloud were lagging these other platforms. We asked a question on how these users were using container orchestration frameworks. As you may know, Platform 9 also ran a survey like this at DockerCon barely 18 months ago in Seattle. At that time, we found that interest in Docker Swarm, obviously that was a Docker show, so interest in Docker Swarm was significantly ahead of interest in Kubernetes and Mesos, which were a distant number 2 and number 3. Now, 18 months later at Austin, interest in Kubernetes was massive. Obviously, it's a Kubernetes show, so there is a sampling issue here, but a total of 97% of the audience were interested in Kubernetes, and there was not as much interest in Docker. and Mesos was a distant third in terms of interest and adoption. Amongst Kubernetes solutions, there was a lot of interest in running Kubernetes on premises or in the public cloud using the open source distribution, but there was also a fair amount of interest in evaluating and using vendor-supported Kubernetes distributions, which bodes very well for the continued growth of the community. One final question that we asked was, what were some of the top concerns that the community had, the users had around the use of cloud-native technologies? And there was actually a fair amount of vote that expressed a fair amount of concern with different factors. The number one issue that people were concerned about was the complexity of managing across multiple cloud and data center environments. As you may remember, the stat we shared previously, customers are using this with on-premises infrastructure, with Linux, with VMware, with AWS, with Google Cloud, and with Azure. And needless to say, the complexity of running a seamless Kubernetes control plane or a managed Kubernetes environment across all of these environments was cited as the top challenge. The second biggest challenge was the complexity of running stateful, data-intensive workloads. Now, this is an area in which the Kubernetes community is investing significantly. So I expect that next time KubeCon rolls around in Seattle next year, you'll see this concern get mitigated to a larger extent than it is today. The third biggest concern was the complexity in operating Kubernetes, just the operations skill set that is needed to run a Kubernetes deployment in the enterprise. And that was also a significant concern for the community. So I hope you found these insights, these survey data points insightful. The thing that struck me the most was how real multi-cloud is becoming in the Kubernetes community, and how much interest there was in running Kubernetes across multiple platforms, and how much recognition there was also in the complexity of running Kubernetes for the multi-cloud world. And I hope to see you at the next KubeCon in either Copenhagen or in Seattle. Till then, take care.